What if I told you the biggest threat to Lil Durk at trial is not the judge, not the prosecutors, not even the blogs that have been milking every courtroom update for clicks like it is the last carton of milk on earth? What if the real danger is 5 people? 5 people, 5 lanes of evidence, 5 pressure points in one federal case that is already heavy enough to crush a career, a brand, and an entire mythology in one shot. Because this is not a rap beef recap. This is not a gossip story. This is not one of those situations where people throw around the word case because somebody got detained, posted bail, and went back to posting captions with a black heart emoji. No. This is federal. This is murder for hire. This is prosecutors saying a revenge plot was set in motion after King Von's death. This is a 2022 Los Angeles shooting that allegedly targeted Quando Rondo and ended with his cousin, Lil Pab, dead. This is a courtroom where every word matters, every text matters, every trip matters, every witness matters. And the craziest part? Lil Durk has pleaded not guilty. His lawyers are fighting hard. They say the government's case is flawed. They say prosecutors overreached. They say some witness stories changed. They say this is not about rap lyrics and not about creative expression. They are trying to cut holes in the government's theory before a jury ever gets the full picture. But here is the problem. A defense can survive 1 bad witness, sometimes even 2. But 5 pressure points in one federal case? That is where things start getting ugly. Because if even 2 or 3 of these pieces land clean in front of a jury, the narrative can shift from "the feds are reaching" to "hold on, this is looking organized." And once a jury starts seeing organization, planning, travel, logistics, communication, and motive all in one place, the vibe changes fast. So today, we are breaking down the 5 people who could do the most damage to Lil Durk at trial. One of them may have come from inside his own circle. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why this case has so many people nervous, glued to every update, and arguing online like they are somehow on the defense team themselves. Let's get into it. First, let's clear something up. Lil Durk is not in this position because of one random rumor. He is in this position because federal prosecutors say he directed and financed a retaliation plot aimed at Quando Rondo after the killing of King Von. According to the government's theory, multiple associates traveled to California, tracked Quando Rondo, and an ambush at a gas station ended with Lil Pab being killed while Quando survived. That is the allegation. Durk denies it. He has pleaded not guilty. That part matters. And it matters a lot. But this is where people get lazy. They hear not guilty, and either act like the case is fake or hear federal, and act like conviction is automatic. Both takes are stupid. This is not social media court. This is actual court. And actual court is all about how the story gets built. And if the government can build a story that sounds connected, credible, and consistent, Durk has a real problem. So let's talk about person number 1. Person number 1, the insider. This is the one that should make anybody in Durk's camp uncomfortable. Not because the public knows every detail. Not because the blogs know how to explain it. But because insiders are dangerous in a way outsiders never are. An outsider can speculate. An insider can narrate. And when somebody from inside the circle starts talking, suddenly the government does not have to guess what certain texts meant, or why certain people moved the way they moved, or how the internal structure worked. Suddenly they have somebody who can tell a jury, this is how it operated. This is who did what. This is what people were saying. That is a problem. Durk's own defense has pointed to a cooperating witness whose story, according to them, changed over time. That is a huge part of this case. Because the defense is basically saying, this witness first said there was no bounty, then later gave investigators a version that helped the prosecution more. And when a witness story evolves in a federal case, the defense is going to attack that like sharks smelling blood in the water. And they should. If the jury thinks the witness tailored his story to please the government, that can hurt the prosecution badly. But let me tell you what makes this witness still dangerous. Even a messy insider can destroy you if enough of his story lines up with other evidence. That is the part fans ignore. They think if a witness changed one detail, the whole case disappears in a puff of smoke like a cartoon magician. No. If prosecutors can say, yes, his account developed, but look at the travel records, look at the texts, look at the calls, look at the timelines, then that witness becomes the glue. not the whole case. The glue. And glue is underrated until it holds everything together. So if the government puts an insider on that stand and that person calmly explains motive, hierarchy, conversations, or money flow, that can be devastating. Especially if the jury believes he has first-hand knowledge, and especially if the defense cannot fully tear him apart. And that is why person number 1 is so dangerous. Because one insider can turn a pile of disconnected facts into a story. And juries do not convict on vibes. They convict on stories that make sense. Now let's move to person number 2. Person number 2, DeAndre Wilson. This is where the case starts feeling less like speculation and more like structure. Because prosecutors have treated DeAndre Wilson as a major figure in the alleged conspiracy. And once you start reading through the government's theory, you begin to see why. Wilson is not just another random name floating around the indictment. He is one of the people federal prosecutors say was directly involved in the alleged operation. Now here is why that matters. When the government wants to prove a conspiracy, they do not just throw names on paper for decoration. They try to show roles. They try to show function. They try to show movement. They want the jury to believe this was not chaos. They want the jury to believe it was coordinated. And Wilson sits right inside that coordination theory. The defense has already pushed back hard on parts of that. They have argued that witness stories shifted. They have argued that key claims got watered down in later charging documents. They want jurors to think the government is patching holes as it goes. Again, smart move. But here is the scary part for Durk. Even if the government softens one allegation, Wilson still matters because he allegedly ties into the travel, the chain of people involved, and the bigger theory that this was not random violence. This was something organized. That word right there, organized, is the word defense teams hate in front of juries. Because random is easier to defend. Organized sounds intentional. Organized sounds funded. Organized sounds led. And if the prosecution can make Wilson look like a man carrying out part of a broader plan, then every other piece gets stronger. Then the flights matter more. Then the cars matter more. Then the hotel rooms matter more. Then the texts matter more. That is how federal cases work. One person is not just one person. One person can become the doorway that lets the jury into the whole structure. And Wilson is not the only name that matters. Not even close. Because person number 3 may be one of the most dangerous logistics people in the entire case. Person number 3, Keon Grant. Now this is where the story starts looking less like a loose street allegation and more like a travel and support operation. According to prosecutors, Keon Grant played a major role in the Los Angeles side of things. And if the government proves even part of what they are alleging here, that is incredibly bad for Durk. Why? Because juries understand logistics. You can argue about lyrics. You can argue about interpretation. You can argue about motive all day. But when prosecutors start laying out hotel rooms, ski masks, rental cars, flights, weapons, meetups, and who provided what, regular people on juries understand that immediately. That is not abstract. That is not artistic. That is not metaphorical. That is real-world movement. And the government's theory is that Grant helped on the ground after others came out to California. If jurors believe he helped arrange rooms, transport, gear, or weapons, the picture starts looking very ugly, very fast. Because then the prosecution is no longer selling just a motive. They are selling infrastructure. And infrastructure is what turns a violent allegation into a conspiracy narrative that can stick. This is also the part where fans start getting quiet. Because it is easy to go online and say, they just mad at Durk because he's a rapper. It is a lot harder to keep that same energy when the government is walking a jury through flights, private travel, gear purchases, and movements across cities. That is the kind of evidence that feels concrete, even before the defense gets its swing at it. Now, of course, Durk's side is going to fight this. They are going to challenge how much he personally knew, what can actually be tied to him, what is inference versus proof, and whether prosecutors are trying to make every action by every other man somehow equal Durk's intent. That is the battle. But if Grant's role comes in clean, detailed, and supported by records, this is exactly the kind of witness lane that can make the government story feel frighteningly real. And that brings us to person number 4, Person number 4. Asa Houston. If person number 3 represents infrastructure, person number 4 represents proximity. And proximity kills defenses. Because the closer somebody is to the actual scene, the more dangerous they become in a trial like this. Prosecutors say Asa Houston was part of the group that tracked Quando Rondo in Los Angeles. Their theory says the target was followed from place to place and that, at the gas station, Houston allegedly positioned a vehicle in a way that helped set up the ambush. Now stop right there. Even if you know nothing about the law, you know that sounds bad. Because when the government starts saying somebody tracked a target, moved in coordination, and positioned vehicles before shots were fired, that is not a spontaneous altercation. That sounds planned. And planned is the prosecution's best friend. If the jury hears about a person helping set the table before gunfire erupted, the emotional effect is huge. Because now this is no longer about one hot-headed moment. It starts sounding like steps, sequence, preparation, decision-making. That matters more than people realize. A jury does not need to see the alleged mastermind at the scene if prosecutors can convince them the people who were there were acting in line with a larger plan. That is why Houston is dangerous. Because he brings the case to the ground level. He drags the theory out of abstract space and puts it right there at the gas station. And once the prosecution gets the jury mentally parked at that gas station, once they start walking them through where cars were, where people moved, who got out, what happened next, the case becomes real in a different way. That is when the courtroom gets quiet. That is when nobody cares about fan edits, Twitter spaces, or who screamed, "Free the guys," the loudest. Because somebody died. And the government is going to keep dragging the jury back to that fact over and over and over again. Lil Pab is dead. That is the center of the case. Not the clout. Not the captions. Not the fandom. And that is why any witness or evidence lane tied closely to the scene can be deadly to the defense. But even with all that, there is still one person who might be more dangerous to Durk than any co-defendant, any associate, any insider, or any logistics witness. And that is person number 5. Person number 5, Lil Durk himself. Yes, himself. Because sometimes the fifth person who can destroy a defendant at trial is the defendant's own image, own conduct, own words, and own paper trail. Let's talk about why. First, prosecutors have leaned hard on the idea that this case is about conduct, not lyrics. They have pushed back against the defense narrative that Durk is being criminalized for his music. Durk's lawyers have fought that, and they did score a meaningful point when some lyrical references were removed from the indictment after they argued a particular song had been recorded months before the shooting. That was important. That was not nothing. But this is where people got ahead of themselves and started acting like the lyrics issue ended the case. It did not. Because later rulings still opened the door for some lyrics to potentially be heard by the jury, specifically lines prosecutors say go to motive, especially around the "slide for Vaughn" and revenge narrative. Other lyrics were excluded, especially where the judge saw too much prejudice or too much pure character evidence. So this is not a total win for either side. It is a messy middle. And messy middles are dangerous because both sides can still use them. Now add the text. The text that prosecutors have focused on where Durk allegedly told somebody not to book flights under names tied to him. The defense says it is out of context. The prosecution says it shows concealment. And in a federal trial, a single text can feel bigger than a whole mixtape if the jury thinks it sounds like somebody trying not to leave fingerprints. Then add the bail issues. Durk was denied bail more than once. Judges considered him a flight risk. One ruling focused on the allegation that he tried to travel toward Dubai, a country without a U.S. extradition treaty, and that the timing looked suspicious. The defense said he had business and spiritual reasons for travel. The court was not convinced. Then add the jail conduct issues. There were allegations that he used other inmates' phone accounts and made three-way calls while in custody. The defense argued that kind of phone sharing is common and that there was no sinister intent. But the judge still looked at it as rule-breaking that raised concerns. And here is the point. Trials are not just about the one crime charged. They are also about whether a jury thinks the defendant behaves like somebody who respects rules, tells the truth, and deserves the benefit of the doubt. That is human nature. So if the prosecution can make Durk look like a man who used influence, money, coded communication, travel maneuvers, and jail workarounds while always staying a step away from the actual violence, that is an incredibly dangerous image. Not because image alone convicts, but because image shapes how all the facts get received. That is why person number 5 is Durk himself. Not because he has spoken in court beyond pleading not guilty. Not because he has testified. But because the government will absolutely try to put his own communications, his own conduct, and his own surrounding narrative in front of the jury and say, this was not an accident. This was a man with motive, power, people, and a plan. And if the jury buys that, the defense has a serious mountain to climb. Now, let's talk about the part of this case that makes it even harder. The trial delays, the lyrics fight, and the defense counterattack. Durk's team is not rolling over. Let's be very clear about that. They have fought witness credibility. They have fought the lyric evidence. They have fought the idea that this is a clean, straightforward prosecution. They have pushed back on bail rulings. They have argued the indictment shifted. They have argued key facts were overplayed or wrongly framed. They have raised concerns about prejudice, including issues around threats made in connection with the case and whether the defense was kept in the dark too long. That matters. Because a federal indictment is not the same thing as a guilty verdict. The defense only needs to create reasonable doubt. That is it. They do not have to prove Durk innocent in the poetic sense people use online. They need to make jurors hesitate. They need to make them feel like the government connected dots too aggressively, relied too much on cooperators, or tried to stretch rap world context into courtroom certainty. And that strategy can work. Especially if jurors dislike the use of lyrics. Especially if they distrust cooperators. Especially if they think the government overcharged to force leverage. That is why this case is still so important and so interesting. Because it is not over. Not even close. Durk has also added serious firepower to the legal team. Brian Steele moving into the defense orbit got people talking immediately, and for good reason. You do not bring in heavyweight legal talent because you think this is a parking ticket. You bring in heavyweight legal talent because the stakes are suffocating. And the stakes here are suffocating. Durk is still in custody. The trial has been pushed back. The co-defendants tried to separate their cases and the judge said no. So now the whole thing keeps moving as one giant, complicated, high-risk federal machine. And that can be bad for everybody involved. Because when people are tried together, the danger of spillover is real. One man's ugly fact can splash onto another man. One witness statement about one person can color how the jury sees the whole group. The judge may believe jurors can separate it all in their minds, but let's be honest, humans are not robots. When a case starts sounding dark enough, everybody at the defense table feels the heat. And that is why the title of this video matters. Not one person. Not one smoking gun. Not one secret witness. 5 people. 5 lanes of damage. An insider. A major co-defendant. A logistics link. A ground-level participant. And Durk himself through the government's framing of his words and behavior. That is what makes this case scary. Not one perfect piece. A cluster. And clusters are how federal cases breathe. Why this case feels bigger than one trial. There is also something else happening here that nobody should ignore. This case is becoming a referendum on a whole era of rap culture. Not just Durk. Not just OTF. Not just Chicago drill. People are watching this case and asking bigger questions. When does image become evidence? When does loyalty become conspiracy? When do lyrics stop being entertainment and start being used as motive? When does influence stop being success and start being treated like power over people? And the answers are not clean. That is what makes this so explosive. Because if Durk beats the case, his supporters are going to say the government tried to criminalize a rapper and failed. If he loses, prosecutors and critics are going to say this was never about music, it was about murder. There is almost no middle ground left. That is why every hearing has tension. That is why every filing gets turned into 100 YouTube videos. That is why every little ruling becomes breaking news for people who suddenly pretend to be constitutional scholars because they watched 2 bond hearings and a body language breakdown. But beneath all the noise, this case is still brutally simple. The government says Durk put revenge in motion. The defense says the government has not proved that. And somewhere between those two positions sits a jury that will eventually have to decide which story feels real. And that brings us to the final point. Final blow. If you are Lil Durk, you do not need every witness to be believable. You do not need every allegation to be airtight. You do not need every piece of evidence to be devastating. You just need enough of it to stick. That is what makes this federal case so dangerous. The prosecution does not need a movie scene. They need a pattern. A witness who explains. A co-defendant who connects. A logistics trail that looks deliberate. A scene participant who puts the operation on the ground. And a defendant whose own words or conduct make the bigger theory feel plausible. That is enough to put a man in very serious trouble. Now, does that mean Lil Durk is finished? No. Absolutely not. He still has a defense. He still has lawyers. He still has the right to challenge every witness, every inference, every government leap. He still has the presumption of innocence. And until a jury says otherwise, that matters. But if you are asking who could hurt him most at trial, it is not some random internet commentator in a ski mask avatar talking tough in the comments. It is these 5 people. And one of them may have started from inside the circle. That is the part nobody wants to say too loud. Because cases like this do not usually get stronger from the outside in. They get stronger when somebody close enough to know how the machine works starts talking. So now I want to ask you this. Do you think the government really has a tight conspiracy case? Or do you think they have a flashy theory built on shaky witnesses and rap world optics? Do you think the insider lane is the most dangerous part? Or is Durk's biggest problem actually his own alleged texts, travel issues, and the way prosecutors can frame his behavior? And most importantly, when this trial finally starts, do you think the jury is going to see a rapper getting overcharged? Or a man who got too comfortable believing distance equals protection? Let me know what you think. Because one thing is certain. When this case reaches trial, the blogs are going to have a field day, the fan bases are going to lose their minds, and every single one of these 5 names or lanes is going to matter more than people realize. And by then, the story will not be about captions, clout, or who screamed, "Free Smirk," the loudest. It will be about who the jury believed. And that is where everything changes.